Hello, and welcome to Candid Career Conversations, a monthly webinar series hosted by the Point Park University Professional Career Readiness Center. My name is Kenny, and I'm the coordinator for employer recruitment and student engagement in the Professional Career Readiness Center at Point Park University. I will also serve as your moderator for today's discussion. Today, we'll be talking about a topic that involves diversity, equity, and inclusion in not only our personal lives, but the workplace as well. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Professional Career Readiness Center, which provides programs and services to enhance student success by providing opportunities to achieve career readiness, increase knowledge of career pathways, and connect to experiential learning opportunities such as internships and co-ops. The center also helps students in developing professional skills as well as connecting to meaningful employment through strategic partnerships and targeted events. So what are the webinar goals for today? So we'll explore the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion and other terminology relating to that. What are the benefits of diversity, equity, and inclusion in a workplace? What can we do to make the workplace a positive environment for everybody? And how can we become more inclusive and an advocate for others? So today we are joined by Dr. Brittany Brinkman, Professor of Psychology and the Director of the PsyD program here at Point Park University. And also Jessica Hobson, who is now Jessica Boston because she just recently got married. And she is the director of the Professional Career Readiness Center here at Point Park University. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Hi, it's good to be here.
So to start off with, would both of you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what your role is here at Point Park?
Yeah, I can go first. I'm Jessica Boston, as Kenny mentioned, and I'm the Director of Career Readiness at Point Park University. So my role really is to oversee all aspects of our Career Center. And as I like to say, I just really focus on eliminating any obstacles related to individuals, really finding what their career goals are and then being able to accomplish those career goals. We have a wonderful team of professionals that focus on career counseling, that focus on experiential learning and helping students to get that hands-on experience, and then also really focus on helping students to connect with employers and vice versa. So it is really my pride and joy to really lead this team and to help them achieve all of their goals to really help our students be successful.
Thank you for that, Brittany.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brittany Brinkman. I'm an associate professor in the psychology department and director of our doctorate in clinical psychology program. So I teach classes mostly in the master's and the doctoral program across different topics. And then as the director of the PsyD program, I help recruit in our new students and get them oriented to the program and really support them throughout the program that's preparing them to become psychologists. My research is really in this area we're going to be talking about today around psychology and social justice, issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I try to bring students into that work and do a lot of work in the community in that area as well.
And Brittany, I also know that you have a little slideshow for us to present.
I do, yeah. All right, so I'm going to start off with some definitions so that we are working with a shared understanding of these terms. You might have heard of this acronym of DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. These three terms are related, as I'll talk about today, but it's really helpful for us to also draw some important distinctions. Diversity is probably the term we use most often, and this term really refers to the people, who is included. And in this case, I'm going to talk about all these terms as they relate to the workplace in particular. So who are the people in the organization? So an organization that values diversity is going to be intentional about employing a workforce that includes people of a variety of different social identities, really making sure that they're being thoughtful and intentional about having diversity amongst the people working in the organization. Equity is really about how people are treated. So making sure that people are being treated in fair and just ways. Sometimes people confuse the terms equity and equality, but they are different and they're an important difference. So equity is about giving people what they need, while equality is really about treating everybody in the same way, regardless of what people need. So really we want to be striving for equity, where we're thinking about what each person's bringing to the table and what they need, and making sure that they're needs are being met. Workplaces that really value equity will have transparency in their policies so that everyone knows that things are happening in a fair way, and they'll make sure that people have equal access to opportunities. And then inclusion really is about making sure that people feel empowered in the workplace and that they have a sense of belonging. So inclusive workplaces are ones that don't just have diverse groups of people working there, but that all of the people are engaged in all aspects of the work and the functioning of the organization and are included in important decisions that are being made. Inclusion really requires that everyone feels respected and included. In some workplaces, people in the more dominant positions might think that the environment is diverse, they might think that it's fair, but they may not realize that some of their more marginalized colleagues are not being fully included. So it's important that we attend to all three of these things: diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then the final term that I'm going to offer for us today is intersectionality. This term is helpful because it provides us a framework to really understand people's lived experiences across a whole variety of social identities and how they might interact in the workplace. Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality, and she talks about it really as a lens that allows us to see where power comes and collides, how it interlocks and intersects. And we often think about how we can use this term to understand how somebody's race, class, gender, sexual orientation, other aspects of identity might overlap and intersect. We are not just one aspect of our identity, we are a combination of all of these different aspects. So I believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion are valuable in their own right, and that they will produce a better and more just world when we promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in all aspects of our lives. We also know that there's ample evidence that when we promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace specifically, that there are a lot of advantages. I'm going to talk about just a few of them here, but there's actually a pretty robust body of research in psychology showing some of these advantages. A number of research studies have been conducted that explore the advantages of having diversity in the workplace, and in particular, having diverse teams working together. So we know that teams that have diversity will create more innovative ideas and actually make better decisions. This happens because people are bringing together a variety of worldviews and different viewpoints. They are able to generate new ideas. They can also problem solve because they're seeing things from different angles. When your team consists of people who all have very similar values or worldviews or lived experiences, they might all come up with similar ideas or similar solutions. So when you bring diverse teams together, you're going to have a bigger range of problem-solving strategies and perspectives to draw on. Equity and inclusion in the workplace have huge impacts on the overall culture of the environment and how people feel about their job, whether they want to stay there, how long they stay there. We know that equity and inclusion have really big effects on employee retention. Employees who feel that their workplace is fair to themselves and others, right? They don't just want it to be fair to them, they want it to be fair for their colleagues. And where they feel truly included in important decisions that are being made are much more likely to be committed to the work. So there's research that shows that when employees trust that they're being treated fairly, they're 5.4 times more likely to want to stay for a long time at their company. They're 6.3 times more likely to feel pride. And they're 9.8 times more likely to actually look forward to going to work. So employees are happier, they're more productive, they're more committed to their jobs when their workplace values diversity, equity, and inclusion. DEI has an impact in the workplace on a number of different levels. Patricia Hill Collins created a matrix to understand how intersecting social identities have an influence across different domains. We often think about DEI as it relates to interpersonal interactions, which are really important, right? These are the interactions that happen in between people in the workplace, but it's helpful to also make sure that we consider DEI at these other levels as well. So the interpersonal domain is just what it sounds like, how we interact with other people. The cultural domain really looks at stereotypes that might be present and sort of cultural practices in the workplace. They might be written down, they might not be. They might be things that a lot of people do, but no one has really explicitly said. The disciplinary domain are the more written policies and procedures, and the structural domain is the way that the workplace is structured. So I'm going to talk us through some questions just to kind of think about how we might explore what DEI is looking like based on these different levels, specifically in the workplace. So at the interpersonal level, questions that we can ask about a work environment to understand how diversity, equity, and inclusion are functioning. This one really is kind of the most basic, right? Are people treating each other with dignity and respect? Are people telling offensive jokes in the workplace based on aspects of social identity? Are people using degrading terms or terminology that social groups have said that they prefer not to be used? Are people using a practice of introducing themselves with their pronouns and allowing everyone to use their correct and chosen pronouns? And then also really exploring if harassment's happening in the workplace. Harassment might be happening based on different aspects of social identities. At the cultural level, we can explore whether diverse lived experiences are being valued and explored. So are there only some perspectives that are brought to the table when a team is exploring ideas? Are there some worldviews that are seen as more important or more valued? Things like holidays. Is it that the company always practices or observes certain religious holidays and other ones are ignored or neglected? Are there perceptions about what it means to behave professionally? Sometimes people think that professional behavior is an objective standard, but it's not. It's a cultural standard. In a lot of workplaces in the United States, the behaviors that are considered professional based on a white culture are often integrated into workplaces without realizing that some of those practices are really culturally based, and there's a lot of different ways to behave professionally. Do people get punished if they don't conform to certain stereotypes? If women are outspoken in the workplace, are they called, derogatory terms or kept out of decision making because they're seen as being too aggressive or too pushy? Are there ways that maybe, again, people might be socially isolated? Are certain people not invited to social events or activities that, are billed as social events, but really are where decisions are being made? So are people being expected to fit into certain dominant stereotypes? And does the workplace value work-life balance, right? We're hearing a lot about this. I think we have always, but especially during the time of COVID, that some people are being forced out of the workplace more than others. And we're seeing that women are disproportionately leaving the workplace at higher rates because of the need to take care of children or other family members. So if the workplace doesn't value people's family obligations as well as their work obligations, that often has a disproportionate impact on some people more than others. So all of these things at the cultural level might be written into policies and they might not be, but they still have an effect on the culture of the environment. The next level is the actual written policies and procedures of the workplace. So one is just, are there DEI trainings, right? So how do we know whether this is valued? Are people required to participate in trainings? And what do they look like, right? Is it a one-time, when you start your job, you have to do trainings, but then no one ever talks about it again? Or is there an environment of ongoing growth and development? Are there practices that will ensure that everybody has equal opportunities for promotion and advancement? There's a large body of research that shows that women and people of color are not promoted at the same rates as men and white people. And often that's because of implicit biases by management. And there are ways to address those things. There are practices that organizations can use to make sure that those implicit and maybe unknown biases aren't getting in the way of people having opportunities for advancement. So is the organization being proactive to fight against some of those challenges? Similarly with hiring, there's a lot of research that shows that if an organization isn't being attentive to it, that there will be bias in hiring. So are they using the practices that help prevent that bias from impacting hiring decisions? Things like dress codes. Dress codes often are discriminatory. They discriminate. They usually force people to identify in a gender binary and then expect people to dress differently based on that. Some dress codes have restrictions on certain hairstyles that disproportionately impact people of color. So it's okay for an organization to have a dress code, but is the dress code a way that's actually enforcing stereotypes and biases? And then at the structural level, who has decision-making power in the organization, right? Is it only certain people? How do they get into the roles where they get to make those decisions? Those are all those other layers, but at a structural level, there's a question of who has decision-making power. And this in particular, right, is there one person who's in charge, maybe a CEO or a president? And is that one person a cisgender, hetero, white man, right? So who's making the decisions? Is there room for more than one person to be making decisions? If it's really one person has a lot of say, you can't have diversity of one, right? So what is the structure in place to ensure that diverse perspectives are being valued? So what is management, right? Depending on the organization, that might be a term is used, is management, but there's the sort of ways that the structures put into place, who gets to make decisions, who's being forced to act out those decisions, and what is that, the structures that allow more people in the organization to have a say over what's happening. So even if someone's not a manager, they should have an avenue for influence, right? A really important part of inclusion is not just being in the organization, but actually having a say in how the organization functions. So what is the avenue that every employee has to have an influence over their job, over how the organization works? If they have concerns about what's happening, is there an avenue for them to address those? If they have ideas about what the organization can be doing differently, is there an avenue for that? Pay differentials are huge, right? So this is often structural. What is the highest paid employees? What are they making? And what are the lowest paid employees making? And if there's a big gap between those two things, that tells you something about the valuing of some employees over others. So again, these are just a handful of questions, but ways to think about how diversity, equity, and inclusion can show up at all the different levels of an organization, and ways to start to ask questions about them. So I'm going to end until we move over to Q&A, but just that we can all play a part in this. So we can reflect on our own identities, how they show up in the workplace. We can be aware that our perspective isn't the only one, and not always having that be kind of the center of the conversation, right? How do we decenter our perspective and make room for other perspectives? We can be advocates for equitable policies and practices, and really being open to this being a long-term growing opportunity.
Wow, Brittany, you gave a lot of information, and I think it would be useful to a lot of our students here. You talked about equity and how the definition for that and how it's different from equality. Intersectionality, which is huge in today's society because we all come from different backgrounds. We're all different people who come from different places. And once we understand that, I think we can start to move on as a society. The advantages for diversity in the workplace, right? The different questions that you pose on the different levels, the company, the structural level, what else? Interpersonal. I think everything's really important for our students to know. But I would like to bring in Jessica again for our Q&A portion. So kind of going into that, students, when they're searching for a company, some of them might want to know, how does diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of fit into this company? Do they have specific, resources for that? What tips do you have for students to help them determine if a company or organization supports diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Kenny. I think this is such an important topic because everyone wants to work for a company that you feel like you belong, you feel like you have room for growth, and you feel like your work is appreciated and you as an individual are appreciated. So some of the tips that I tend to share with students is, well, first and foremost, research, right? A lot of this information is available at our fingertips using some of the sites that we visit often, such as Google. So, if you want to know if a company is inclusive or if they have a culture of diversity and equity, look at their company webpage. Typically, I tell folks to start with the About Us section, or whatever the section may be titled, that tells you the details about the organization itself. You really want to pay attention to a few key things, such as the organization's mission, vision, values, and any goals or priorities that they're listing on the website. Are there any mentions of diversity, equity, inclusion? If not, that's a big, indicator right there that maybe diversity and equity and inclusion are just not a priority to that organization. If folks want to know if a workplace is visually diverse, right? Because it's tough for us to say a workplace is not diverse by pictures, but we can tell if it's visually diverse from photos, using the same tools, the company website, right? Explore the company leadership page. A lot of folks say, it really starts at the top. Look at that company leadership, explore their bios, look at their photos, look at their LinkedIn, look at their previous work experience. Again, diversity is not just race or gender, it's diversity of ideas as well. So dig into the folks that you're seeing on these company websites as leaders to see if they are coming from diverse backgrounds. And you can actually take it a step further, and you can look at staff across the company as well using a great tool such as LinkedIn. You can simply go into LinkedIn, you can enter the company name, and you can search individuals who work for that organization. Now, it's not going to show you everybody, but it will show you folks who are listing that organization as their employer on their profile. So that'll really give you a good idea if perhaps the division, the department, the specific team that you want to work for is really reflective of what you're hoping to see within a workplace. One of my favorite things to do, and I do this myself, is to dig through some of those company reports on websites. I like to say that actions speak louder than words. I could start a website today and say that I do, 20 different things related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, but look at the actual reports, look at where the money is going. Folks say all the time, follow the dollars, and you will see. Find out, again, what are the priorities of the company? What are some of their commitments, some of their community partners? Where are their charitable contributions going? Do they have any charitable contributions that they participate in? Again, these are really good indicators on what's important or what's not important to the company. Two other tips. As Professor Brinkman had mentioned, does the company offer opportunities for ongoing training and development, as well as opportunities for advancement? So before you even step into the door, are they thinking about how far can this person go in the organization? Is there actually a path that you can follow to go beyond just the job that you walked in the door to? That is so important, because I think a lot of times what we see is that folks may, come into an organization at an entry-level job. It could be a mailroom, it could be food services, it could be a job fresh out of school. But if someone's not actually advocating for you and helping you think about your full potential within that organization, it's really easy to not go any further, and to watch your colleagues who had other opportunities, other mentors in the room for them, their career path is going to look completely different. The trajectory is going to look different than yours. So again, finding an employer that has plans for their employees. And then lastly, use diversity resources to identify employers. And this is where Google comes in. You can do a simple Google search of top US companies for diversity. There are so many different lists and awards that are given out for just about everything these days. So Google those lists, dig through those employers, and actually see what companies really, align with what you're hoping to see in the workplace. And another great tool is you can actually look for any local economic development organizations in your area. For instance, in Pittsburgh, there's one called Vibrant Pittsburgh that has a commitment to diversity. If you look through all of their corporate partners, it will let you know what companies in our region are working with them on a regular basis to advance diversity. That's another great indicator of if a company pays attention and really prioritizes diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace.
I think you make a great point. Research the company that you want to, work for, because as much as they're interviewing you as a candidate are also interviewing them. If you're not going to feel comfortable in the workplace, why would you want to work there? Next question, what can a student do if they experience or observe an incident on the job that discriminates against an individual? based on, their race, gender, sexual orientation, etc.
Yes, I first want to just acknowledge that, this can be a very traumatic experience and it can be very difficult. Um, One of the first things that I would recommend that students do, or really that anyone does, is to document everything. You want to make sure you're taking down names, dates, times, actions, everything from the initial incident to individuals that you reported it to, the dates you reported it, the actions that were taken, etc. Because you never know when you're going to actually need that information. So going into kind of that reporting process, you should report this immediately to a supervisor and the HR team, the human resources team at the organization. If you're a Point Park student or alum, we also ask that you report it to our career services team. We ask that because we want to make sure that we're sending students to a workplace that is truly as safe as possible for them. And we want to make sure that you also have a liaison to help you through this process that can help you access resources. And we want to make sure that you're not handling all of this on your own. You want to make sure you're participating in the investigation process. So a lot of times, you may report something that happens in the workplace, and then there is an investigation that typically follows it. So you want to make sure that you are participating fully in that process. One thing I want to make note of, as someone who is reporting information, you want to make sure that you are alert to potential retaliation in the workplace. You may not experience retaliation, but you might. When you speak up against any type of discrimination in the workplace, you're a whistleblower. And so you have specific protections by law to make sure that you are not being discriminated against or retaliated against as a result of that report. So if you believe that you have been discriminated against, or you made a report and you believe you've been retaliated against, you want to make sure that you contact the the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. You can actually file a complaint, a charge of discrimination, and they will investigate it and take action upon it. And you may also need to take additional steps to seek legal counsel to assist you through this process as well. But again, those initial steps, you want to document everything. You want to make sure that you report it, and you want to make sure that you're being cognizant of your surroundings to make sure that you're not falling victim of any type of retaliation.
And I think one key thing to know, and for students to know, is that they have support. Going through this, they have a bunch of different avenues that they can take, a bunch of different resources that can help them out to make them feel supported as well, so they're not alone in this process, so that they can move forward and possibly get the justice that they deserve.
And I always tell students as well, when in doubt, you can also contact our Title IX office. They can let you know if it's something that they're able to assist with or not, really depending on where something may occur. Will categorize if it's handled by our Title IX office or if it's handled by an outside party. But again, you want to make sure that you tell somebody, and you want to make sure that you're documenting that information as well.
Definitely. Now, Brittany, you mentioned earlier in your presentation about implicit biases, and we all have them, right? But how can an individual become more aware of their own biases?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think actually that's one of the first steps, is realizing that we do all have biases, and that's okay, right? That doesn't make us bad people. That what we can do is become more aware of them and work to change them, and work to make sure that our biases aren't impacting the way that we actually interact with other people. So I think that part of that then is knowing that it's common to have them, and then really practicing what like contemplative psychology and Buddhists call non-judgmental self-awareness, which is hard, but you can practice it. So it's really being able to become more aware of something that you're feeling or thinking, and noticing that it's there without automatically judging yourself for it. So realizing that maybe you had a thought and you're like, oh, wow, that really is biased. It's based on a stereotype. I know that's not true. And not jumping to, I must be a terrible person. Because when we judge ourselves and start feeling really guilty, then we're more likely to shut down and not do that self-awareness work. So practicing being able to notice our thoughts and our feelings without judging ourselves, recognizing that would biases come up? And then knowing that we are not our thoughts, right? So we can have a thought and not have to enact it. We can recognize, wow, that thought's totally a stereotype, and I know that's not true, and I'm not going to treat people based on that stereotype. So practicing that non-judgmental self-awareness and separating ourselves from our thoughts. And then we know that like with implicit biases, often they come about because we're getting so many messages about groups that are inaccurate stereotypes, and that's all the information that we're getting. So starting to become more aware of that, you might also realize that there are certain social identities that you don't actually know a lot of accurate information about, and that might be an area for you to sort of explore. How do I learn real information about different groups of people through documentaries and biographies and interacting with groups, so that all the information I'm taking in isn't just stereotypes that show up in our media.
And one of the things that you brought up in your presentation was to be open, right? Be open to, new information that you might have never learned, educate yourself. So much knowledge in the world about different cultures, different groups of people that you can know and possibly become a better person in the future, and advocate for those groups of people.
Absolutely.
So Jessica, what can a student do to expand their understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, so we talked about some of these things already, but I mean, the biggest thing is, one, to just be open to learning, and to be aware that we all have a part in this journey. As we talked about, identifying and addressing your own biases and holding yourself accountable. I think that's a big first step. And I think it's important to make note that it's okay to not always be perfect. It's okay to make a mistake, to catch yourself, to, have to correct a friend or a family member when they say something. That's all a part of the journey. But again, identifying those biases, addressing them, and holding yourself and holding others accountable is a big first step. Also, as we talked about, not just relying on the media for stereotypes that you may have. And just really opening your mind, reading books, listening to podcasts, watching different movies. I think that stuff is really helpful, but I think what might actually be most helpful is just going to spend time with people who are not like you. And it's difficult, especially right now with everything that's going on with COVID-19. But, spending time and listening to people who are not like you is going to give you so much more education and awareness on a person's experience, on their background, than you will ever get from a book, from a movie, from, a podcast. So you want to just get out there and get that experience with folks who are unlike you. Be thirsty for that education and seek out the trainings and the education related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. As we mentioned, this is a constantly evolving field. And so you want to make sure that you are doing your part to try to stay on top of things, or to at least look once in a while to see, well, what can I do to improve upon my skills? And then lastly, something that I've tried to do with myself that I always recommend to others is to always ask yourself, especially if you're in charge of hiring, if you're planning an event, if you're really doing anything that impacts other people, before you make a decision, before you implement something, ask yourself, is this inclusive? And it could be for something as, maybe you're throwing a Christmas party and you're throwing it at a venue. You want to ask yourself, is this inclusive? Someone who maybe, has a wheelchair, can they access this party? Someone who might have a hearing impairment, will they enjoy this party? Asking yourself these questions about, is this inclusive? And again, taking it upon yourself to be responsible and to try to do your part can really make a big difference. And imagine the world we would live in if all of us spent, a little bit of extra time each day just asking ourselves, is this inclusive? Am I doing my part? Or what can I do a little bit better?
Definitely becoming more aware of your surroundings and, the events that you put on. Is it, inclusive to everybody? And I always tell my friends, knowledge is power. Research as much as you can, but the best knowledge that you can gain is from personal experiences, having those tough conversations with friends, just learning about each other back and forth.
And I will say, Kenny, if you don't mind, I just have one other thing. I think becoming comfortable with difficult conversations is also very beneficial. I come from a mixed household. And so we regularly have conversations about how individuals react to situations, or how we maybe could have handled something differently. Or diversity is a hot topic in my household at all times. And it's interesting because, I think about, as you mentioned, I just got married, my wedding. The event planner was looking at my fiance's dad and kept asking him if he was the father of the bride, because he didn't want to ask the Caucasian male standing next to me if he was the father of the bride. And so, like, you have to address those types of things in the moment, because if not, those people may continue to go on and on through life just assuming things that, as we know, they shouldn't necessarily be assuming. So again, getting comfortable with those difficult conversations that folks may not want to have, and even being comfortable being the person to bring those up is really a big part of this as well.
Definitely. I think that's the first step, being comfortable enough to have that tough conversation, bringing that, tough topic up to your friends, because you don't know what could happen in the end. So Brittany, we talked about a lot of, inclusivity, being an advocate for marginalized groups. So how does an individual become more inclusive and an advocate for others?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to build on what we've been saying, because I think the core of this is relationships, right? So really building genuine, authentic relationships with people, and really with people who maybe are very different from you, who have different experiences and worldviews. And so I think when we come back to that, that gives us some clues about what we need to do, right? So we need to be open, we need to have a sense of curiosity, we need to listen to other people, and we need to know that we're not going to know everything. We're going to make mistakes, and how to repair those, right? So I think as we want to be more inclusive and advocate for other people and just for a more equitable world, we know we're going to make mistakes along the way. And if we don't try, we're not going to get there. So knowing what to do when we make a mistake. So being able to hear that you made a mistake, right? That maybe you said or did something that was actually hurtful to somebody else, even if it wasn't your intention. Maybe your intention was to try to be more inclusive, but you made a mistake. Being able to hear that and really separate out intent and impact, and that both are valuable, right? So your intent matters. So if your intention is to be more inclusive, that's important. But if your impact was harmful to somebody, that's important too, right? So you can learn from those interactions. And if you really care about the relationship with another person, you're going to want to, right? You're going to care that you hurt them, even if that wasn't on purpose, and hear that from them so that you can apologize and make amends and figure out how to move forward, right? So that everybody learns from the experience and grows from it. And so I think that's really a huge step. And then I do think advocating for ourselves and others is really important. And when we are sitting in positions of sort of the dominant position for an aspect of our identity, that might give us an opportunity to have power and privilege and decision-making ability that the people who aren't in a position of privilege don't have, right? So I think what Jessica says is really important about making sure that we're not making decisions for other people, right? That we're being inclusive about that, but that we're also using our positions of power to work toward advocating for equity. And this is really, really important, especially when those voices may not be in the room, right? So not just, oh, somebody else is here who has a different social identity, I'm going to sort of speak up. But when you're in a room with all other people who are like you, not letting things slide, not letting that become a space where equity and inclusion sort of goes out the window, right? But really making sure that these discussions are at the forefront all the time, right? That we're asking them questions about, is this decision inclusive? Is our workplace inclusive? Who might not feel included if we do X, Y, or Z? Can we talk to somebody about what would be better for them? Yeah.
And it's funny that you mentioned intent versus impact, because as soon as you started talking, I started writing it down in my little notepad. Then you started mentioning it, because intent versus impact is huge. I mention it to my friends all the time. Their intentions might be good, but the impact that it has on others could be sometimes very damaging, especially in the relationships that they have with others. Could potentially end a friendship. And I don't think we want that to happen.
I agree. And I think that we generally know that in relationships, we're not talking about DEI, right? Like if I bump into somebody and I injure them, right? And if I sit there and argue with them about how they're not injured because I didn't mean to do it, right? Like it's almost ridiculous. So somehow, because these conversations are really loaded, I think we sometimes lose those skills that we use in other relational situations, right? So remembering that these are about relationships, and so we're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. It doesn't make us terrible people, but if we're not willing to hear that we made a mistake, if we don't care about hurting somebody, then yeah, that might actually harm the relationship more than the mistake that we made, right? So being able to try to repair those things, I think, is really important, and as a system too, right? Because systems can do the same things, right? If a system or organization keeps making the same decisions, even when they get feedback that decision is harmful to some groups, but they keep doing it, right? That's really harmful. If they make a decision and the groups are like, whoa, wait a second, and then that system or that organization is responsive to that, that can be really an opportunity for growth for everybody. So not expecting ourselves to do all of this perfectly, I think, is really important, because we're not going to, and that leaves us open to actually doing a better job.
So kind of bringing this all full circle, a lot of the discussion that we're talking about today can kind of invoke maybe stress or anxiety in students. So what can a student do if they, start to feel stress, anxiety, or even hopelessness due to like a myriad of stories that they may see on the news, whether it's civil unrest, the COVID pandemic, social injustice, et cetera?
So I think one thing is just knowing that it makes sense to feel stressed, that these conversations, whether we're talking about diversity in the workplace or COVID or the election, right, that if you're feeling stressed about it, there's nothing wrong with you. It makes sense that you're stressed, and giving yourself permission to have the feelings that you have. Generally in psychology, we understand that our feelings serve a function. They're telling us something about our life and our lived experience, our relationships, and usually ignoring them does not make them go away. So here, letting yourself recognize that you're having those feelings. We definitely have resources here at Point Park for students. The University Counseling Center is a great resource. Students can call to get an appointment. We're doing some in-person social distance mask therapy, but also some teletherapy to just sort of find out if that's a space that could be helpful for people. I think there are also some great online resources for like addressing stress, doing mindfulness kinds of work, stepping away sometimes from the news cycle, right? Giving yourself permission to take a break. I think it's good to be informed, but also if we are all burnt out all the time, then we're not going to be able to work toward these things we've been talking about. So setting limits for yourself of like how much of this information you're going to take in, knowing that it's okay to step away, that it's okay to just, spend time with friends safely around COVID, to watch a funny show that, is just like totally has nothing to do with any, the election, right? Like I've been watching kind of old shows and I'm like, oh, pre all of this stuff, right? Just taking that time, getting rest, sleep, so important, right? When we're sleep deprived, it's really hard to manage anything. Going back to some of those basics around exercise, what are you eating? Are you drinking enough water? Like giving yourself permission to take care of yourself. I think sometimes when we really care about something, like these topics around social justice, we get really passionate about it, which is so important, but we also think then we should never take a break. We should never take care of ourselves. We should 100% of the time be, involved, checking Twitter, doing the stuff. And, part of this is like to build a more equitable world where we all are allowed to be human beings who thrive. And that means we get to take care of ourselves too. So giving yourself permission to take care of yourself, I think, is really important.
And that's something I tell myself constantly. Over the summer during the COVID pandemic, I constantly checked the news for the numbers. What were the updates, right? So something I had to tell myself was self-care and boundaries. I had to take care of myself before I could take care of others. The news will always be there. I will find out regardless. Just self-care and boundaries. That's one of the things that I really learned to kind of, compartmentalize in my brain and to help myself out. So last question, kind of unscripted for you guys, right? So what's something, well, you know that we're going through a pandemic right now. What's something that you can't wait to do when this pandemic is over? Do you want me to start? I can start. So for me, I think, just, I wouldn't say living a carefree world, but, going out to dinner, maybe even a bar with friends and not having to worry about my surroundings, and just, living just being in the moment, being in the present, right? And that's one of the things I miss, just being in the present, not have to worry about the future, I guess, and just being there.
I would say I am really looking forward to being in any environment that is filled with like way too many people. Like you think about a concert, you think about like a family party that is just like over capacity. Um, you know, especially as we head into the holiday season, I think for a lot of people, it's just really tough to think about, you know, not having, you know, the crowded Thanksgivings and the holiday celebrations. And um, I know for myself, you know, with our wedding, we went from a guest list of 150 people to just 25 people. And we were so grateful for the people that came, and we, you know, they didn't miss a beat. It felt like we had 150 people in the room and we felt all of the love. But to Kenny's point, you know, being able to just be kind of around people again, feel the energy, feed off of people, and not have to like live in that fear, which I don't know how long it's going to take for us to not like, you know, look at things as being dangerous or unsafe. But that's something I really can't wait for. So, and I'm interested also just to kind of see once things start to, you know, once this starts to go away, we get a vaccine, and once this starts to get a little bit more under control, how life looks. Like, I don't know, will we blow out candles at a birthday party? I don't know, probably not. But those are just like weird things that I can't wait to be around a ton of people. And I just also am just interested to see like, what is our new normal going to actually look like?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I really like traveling, and I travel by myself a lot, and it's a great way to like meet new people and explore new places. And so I really miss that. And just, you know, there's like some ways to travel, I think, safely now, but the freedom of like going to a place and sitting at, you know, the bar at a restaurant by myself and chatting to people and meeting strangers, you know, that feels like not possible right now. So so I definitely miss traveling. And then yeah, I think just like the love of people, you know, I've got a lot of friends with little kids, and like, you know, I can see some of them and I do Zoom with some of them, but just like being together in a big crowd where everyone's hugging and hanging out and sharing food, and just kind of that environment I miss.
Yeah, I can't wait to see, you know, what this new normal will look like, how the world will react, and everything. But I do want to thank both of you for joining today's webinar, sharing your insight, your expertise on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Hopefully it's very useful to the students that are watching this webinar, or for anyone who's watching this webinar. But I'd also like to remind you that the Professional Career Readiness Center here at Point Park, we're here to help you as early as freshman year and long after graduation. So please connect with us on social media so that you can stay up to date with all of our programs, giveaways, and events. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't worry, we won't follow you back. We don't want to know what you're doing. We just want you to keep tabs with the events that we're putting on and what we're doing for you guys. Also, keep in mind, all Career Readiness Center appointments are scheduled through Handshake. So please connect with your career counselor today to schedule a mock interview appointment to practice anything from interviewing to figuring out where you want to go with your career and stuff like that. So thank you again for attending this month's Candid Career Conversation. And we hope to see you at the next webinar that will happen in January. Until then, take care, be safe, and stay healthy.